Hello. The goal of this video is to summarize the concepts pertaining to the deductions allowed against the estate. Having looked at the gross estate, we now turn our attention to the taxable estate. The taxable estate, as defined by Code Section 2051, is the amount determined by deducting from the gross estate the amount of deductions allowed by Code Sections 2053 through 2058. If you go back to when we calculated estate tax, regardless of the calculation in the end, all that is being taxed is the taxable estate. And what we're determining is the actual value that is going to be subject to tax. We'll talk briefly about the deductions as a whole, and we'll start with this first illustration. And in this illustration, we have the net value of the taxable estate, and it's reduced by what would otherwise be taxed. When we look at deductions, there are two baskets. The first basket is the pre-mortem deductions, and that's basically deductions before death. And another basket are post-mortem deductions, which are after-death deductions. Under Code Section 2053, the pre-mortem deductions consist of claims, debts, obligations, basically at death. It also covers the same code section, administration expenses. And under Code Section 2054, the post-mortem deductions consist of losses during the administration of the estate. Under Code Section 2058, we have the state death tax deduction relating to state death taxes that are paid. When we look at Section 2053, we must look at the probate versus the non-probate assets. And the reason we must draw the line between the two types of assets is the rules that we have to apply differ for probate versus non-probate assets. So there is a distinction. So we have three code sections that all have to do with the net value of the taxable estate. And it's that property, that net value of that property that's being transmitted at death, that all have to do with the net value that is going to be used to derive at the taxable estate. If you look at this next illustration, we're going to cover just briefly here deductions that are allowed for policy reasons. And I'm sure when you looked at the deductions, it probably is quite clear that there's deductions there that Congress decided they needed to allow for the sake of the goals they were trying to accomplish. So in particular, we have two policy type of deductions. Under Section 2055, you have your charitable deductions, and under Section 2056, you have your marital deductions. The charitable deduction is allowed to encourage charitable giving by the private sector, and the marital deduction is allowed because it represents the congressional philosophy that the marital unit should be viewed as one single economic unit. So whatever goes on between spouses should not represent a taxable event. The way these policy deductions can be viewed is going to be through this next illustration. And I see that this illustration is falling a little bit outside the parameters of the screen, so right here where you see given, I'll have to explain that to you. So in particular, we have a gross estate of $10 million. And from that gross estate, we would subtract the Section 2056 deductions. Well, the 2056 deductions are deductions that are given to the spouse. After you subtract the deductions given to the spouse, you're going to get a taxable estate of $6,250,000. And this $6,250,000 is given to non-spouses. So under 2056, it's going to the spouse, and any remainder amount is going to anyone other than the spouse. To make sense of this, what occurs is the $3,750,000 that is going to the spouse is not subject to tax, as it's the portion of the estate that's given to the spouse. And remember, if we go back to what we talked about just briefly here under policy deductions, that marital deduction is allowed because Congress decided that the marital unit should be seen as one single economic unit. So that explains why you're going to be able to take this deduction with respect to transfers to the spouse. And that also explains why this remainder would end up being taxed. And then when it's all said and done, you have your taxable estate of $6,250,000. And in a simple calculation, you're going to subtract the unified credit, and then you derive at your estate tax. It's as simple as that. Well, maybe not so simple, but that's it for the summary of the concept behind deriving at the taxable estate.